So going back and talking about the random numbers again, in a program, we can generate numbers. And what we do is we use this random generator number. We talked about it a little bit in a previous class,
I guess
but
will be the
yeah, sure. Some things that we need. Once again, we need an import statement. Okay, this is going to allow us to use certain things like next int. This is something that's coming up. So we're going to import this thing. It's called a class. Eventually we'll pick that up, what exactly it means. But we're going to import a class. And within that class, I'm going to do this thing called Instantiate Objects. Again, don't get excited. When we hit chapter 7, all of this is going to now make sense. We just know right now we need to include it. So I have a variable name, random num. It's actually not a variable. It's called an object, but it's like a variable. And on random num, we can do things. We talked about generating random numbers. And this first number that follows next int was going to be the example of how many numbers I needed. And then if I wanted a displacer to move a starting location, I would add to the end. And we looked at a couple examples. Next int, if I want to go 0 to 5, well, if I want 6 numbers, right? 1 to 6, I put 6 numbers. That gives me 0 to 5. When I add 1, that would now give me 1 to 6. So if this generated the random number 3, I'd add 1 and I would get to 4. And so on. We talked about if I wanted the numbers from 10 to 20, there's actually 11 numbers there. So when I do this, it gives me 0 to 10. When I add 10, it now gives me 10 to 20. From 23 to 36, there's 14 numbers. This would give me 0 to 13. When I add 23, I get 23 to 36. Okay, so we did take a look at it, and what's going to be most common is this first one, where I'm going to want the numbers from 1 to something. Okay, so that's going to be the real popular one. Yeah, in a program, you were doing 1,024 numbers. So if I put 1,024 in here, that gave me 0 to 1,023. When I added 1, it should have given me 1 to 1,024. All right, so here's what I want you to do. We're going to knock the rust off and get back to actually hitting some keys and typing some things. I want you to run a program, write a program that's going to roll a dice 6,000 times. Well, when I roll a die, I'm going to get the numbers 1 to 6. So I'm thinking that guy is my random number generator that I want. Whatever the number is, I want to have a count of that. So if I roll the dice and it's a 1, I want to have a 1 counter that adds 1 to it. And then after I go through my loop of 6,000 times, I'm going to display how many times each number appeared. So my output might look something like the number of 1s was 996. The number of 2s was 1,024. The number of 3s, so all 6 of those are going to be close to 1,000. All right, questions? I'm going to pause the recording. So I now want to go back and under recording purposes, take a look at what I came up with. Again, line 1 was important. We need to import that class. I initialized 6 variables to 0, which you're starting to find out there are times you need to initialize in a loop or in an if statement. Variable might not be used, so the JGrasp gets excited and says, oh no, you might want to initialize that to 0. My loop control variable I do up here in the beginning and num. A lot of people are still putting their variable list other places. I still recommend you put it up here. All right, line 15 again is chapter 7 talk. I'm instantiating an object called random num. And there's my loop that runs 6,000 times. I get a brand new random number each time. Okay, so for this one, I want the random number to be generated new each time. There's going to be times where you only want one random number, like in your 4th reassignment, that should be outside the loop. If it's a 1, if it's a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5, I increment my counters. Jacob said we could use a switch statement. Same idea. And for now, I'm just doing my output to the console because I'm writing the program for me, the programmer. If it's on assignment, it's going to be used by somebody else. Kapow! It needs to be message boxes. Okay, questions? All right. The last section, which actually is the next to the last section, but the last section we're covering is one that's called an intro to files. Now, files are great because if I had 10 pieces of data, I could just type it in, but it would still be a lot. But if I had 1,000 pieces of data, no, that's not so pretty. So I want to be able to store it in a file separate and then be able to have my program use that data file, open it up, read to it, or prep it to write where I can save a whole bunch of information. So there are going to be times where you're going to want to write a program that works with a big data file. Okay. Let's see, things that I need to do. Well, usually there's a 3-step process going on with files. Okay. And here are the 3 kind of what I think are the important steps. Whenever you're writing this, you need to open the file and take care of the steps that you need to do to open it. The next step would be you would read data from the file, or you would write data from the file. Okay, we're not into and or there where you can do both. You need to pick one, read it in or write it, one or the other. So these are the 3 parts that should be in when working with the file. A lot of people forget to close, and that can really mess you up. Now, there's 2 types of files. One's called a text file, and that's what we're going to be working with. In this class, we probably won't get into binary files, I'm not sure. But a text file, that's one where I could go to Notepad and type up all the data and save it in that file if I wanted to. Okay. A lot of times the extension we'll use is going to be .txt. Okay, because it's going to be a text file. I could take JGrasp if I wanted to, open it up, and when I do a save it as .txt, which would make it nicer, or we can save it however we want, but these are all types of data files. All right. When I work with it, I recommend you save the file in the same folder as your program. If you do, you're going to be able to work with just the text file, data.txt. Boom, done. If you save it in another folder in your program, that's when you have to start getting into this C:// my data / data text, whatever the path is to go find it. So if it's in the same folder, we just use the name of the file. If it's not, you're going to have to include the path. All right. As always, yes, I need to import Java IO. And another important thing is you're going to see this throws IO exception. All right. So let's go back. I want to write to a file. And in order to write to a file, I'm going to do something that looks like this. I need print writer. Again, this is that thing I called earlier, a class. This is an object output file. It's like a variable, but it can do more. New print writer. And here I would put the file name, like data.txt. Okay. I want to write to a file, out file, which was the name up here, .println, and I can print a name and it would store it in a file. And then finally, the last thing I would want to do is close the file. Okay, you had code listing 417, which was to write to a file. And that was this puppy down here. You typed it in. And again, here's my import Java util scanner. java.io. Let's see what's going on over here. I'm getting ready to write to a file. So I'm going to read something in from the keyboard. That's why I needed that import scanner. Now I'm going to come down and I read a line in, and I'm going to get ready to, in this case, this author loves this, enter the file name, and then I'm okay with if you just put wherever you want to store it, data.txt. You don't have to ask the user where, but you can. You can ask the user, what's the name of the file you'd like to store the information in? It would enter, it would be here, it would translate over to here. I'm okay if you just hard coded it in and not ask. All right, so here was the first part. I'm opening the file. Here's the next part. I'm going to read things in. Looks like however many friends you have. Hopefully some of you had at least more than one. And when you did this, all of a sudden a text file was generated. This data.txt. Okay. Final step, make sure after we write to the file, I don't know why this isn't highlighted, but we need to make sure we close the file. Now, hopefully if you did this, you went and opened it up, probably with Notepad, and you could see the list of names that you typed in. Good? Yay, excellent. Reading from a file. File, same kind of thing going on here, where here's the file name. You know, we said we could just hard code it in there if we wanted. We take file and we put it here. All right, so I open it. This time I want to read it in. Now, when people do this, which I don't like, string line, this is creating a new line variable every time through. And we really don't need to do that. Just do it once up in the variable list and done. So we don't really need the word string. We will go line equals input dot next line, which is good. Okay, next line. What do you think if it was an integer this would be? Next, say int.
Int.
So thank you. Next int and so on. So we would be able to read it in. So open the file, read or write, like we mentioned earlier. When I read, I'm going to read it into the appropriate variable, close the file. And in code listing 418, boom, you did it. Here you open the file, as I mentioned a moment ago. We're reading in just one line, displaying it. You know, we're just reading in the first name from your data file.
Okay, so I guess normally string line would be initialized in the opening, and then you'd
Yes.
use that.
That's what I prefer. Yes. Yep. Good question. All right, good. So we keep working with files. Now, some things that we can take a look at is, first of all, we can find out if the file exists or not. And a statement like this would be, what if they type the name of a data file and it doesn't exist? Well, we don't want it to crash the program. So we could use a line. You know, again, here's file, that's called an object. We could use a line like this that says, whoa, if it doesn't exist, please enter another name for the file or something so the program doesn't crash, so we don't get a runtime error. So there's this, you know, here's my object name. That's this file from it, or excuse me, right there, the lowercase f file. If it doesn't exist, then, you know, I might want to say, hey, please enter a new name or something. You know, it doesn't look so good. All right, so in the last example, when reading in a file, we took a look at reading just the one and it stopped. Well, what if I want to look at a whole bunch of stuff in a file? Well, let's take a look at code listing 419. I don't have in my notes if you had to type this one in or not, but what's one of the major things that you may come up with for an error? Right here. Whoop, there it is. Throws IO exception. Something new, but if I'm going to work with data files in my public static void main, I need to add this on the end or it won't work. So make sure you're always, when we're working with data files, you include that throws IO exception. If you stay with this ComSci major and you hit CPS 230, that will get explained what's going on. Okay, what that means. But if I want to read in something continuously, again, I open my file, blah, 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 boom, good. Now, check it out. While input file, which is the name of my object, which is my reference to my file actual name, dot has next. Remember, this is a while, so this is going to evaluate as true or false. If there's another piece of data in, I can read it in, display it, and it'll keep looping until I hit something called an end of file marker. So this is a nice, slick way to keep reading things in.
Can I ask a question quick?
Yeah.
So like, would you use that as well? Like if you wanted to like determine like how many lines are like in the actual file or how many like data values?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So if you wanted to go through and count how many, the one thing you have to remember is you might have a variable here instead of that, but it might just be a dummy variable, but you have to keep inputting and store it in the dummy variable. If you don't, it'll get stuck on the first one and never move past the first one. So you have to read it in so that it moves to the next one and to the next one and to the next one. And yes, that's going to be helpful in chapter 7 when you write the program in chapter 7 to keep reading something in like that. Questions? Questions about files? We'll start doing some file programs. Here's another example. If not file exists, doesn't exist, didn't crash it, it just kicked me out. If I made this a while loop, I could keep asking for a new file name until we got it right. Here's that while input file dot has next. Questions? Questions? Okay, since we had actually covered some of the random number earlier and everything, and I think we're pretty good, I'm not going to have you do a program because hopefully you did the code listings, but know this whole idea of working with files is coming up, okay? And what I'm going to do instead is we are going to take a look at, no, I'm not going to start chapter 5 yet. And the reason is we're going to do chapter 5 on Wednesday, and then we're going to have a test next Monday on sections 3 and 4. What we're going to do instead is I'm going to have you do your own file program. I'm going to create a data file of numbers, and I'm going to put it on D2L. You're going to write a program that's going to take that data file. You'll have to download it after I put it up on D2L. Write a program that's going to take that file and let's see, let's call the file numbers.txt. And I'm going to have you read in all the numbers. So you're going to read them in. You're going to find how many there are and what the average is.
Like, you mean how many the sum?
Yeah, well, no, total, how many numbers there are, not the sum. Just count how many there are. And then you're going to find the sum so that you can divide by how many to get the average. All right, so my data file is going to be numbers.txt. I want you to try to write this without copying too much from a code listing.